replay, which is going to be Nestea versus Oz. You can see they're from the WCS America region, from Premier League, Round of 32, Group A. And down below you can actually see, my bot's actually posting these replays for you guys, so you can check them out for yourself if you want to. So that was unexpected, but that was kind of cool. But either way, if you guys are watching this from VOD, I do this every Tuesday at 5 p.m. Eastern on my stream, so come hang out. And later in the show, I will be doing some replay reviews of some community people. So if you want your own replay to be reviewed by me, then go ahead and send it in and sign up through SC2ReplayStats.com. Let me get the replay loaded up here and we'll get going right away. Now what I'm going to be doing is kind of going through these, kind of half casting, half giving insight on them as well. I know these have already been casted and these are quite old replays, but people tend to miss a lot during these games, and I want to kind of go back and run over the things that have gone on in games that I find interesting. So we'll check this out as soon as the game gets loaded up. And here we are. We do have, whoops, both these guys here, Nestea versus Oz. Nestea is obviously the Zerg player, really legendary Zerg player, used to be in Korea, does play for the team I am, and he's fighting Oz here on Polar Night. And I'm going to be kind of focusing all these on depending on whichever race people are playing. So this one in particular, to be focusing mostly from the Zerg perspective, but we're going to be looking at both races kind of a little bit as the game goes on as well. If you guys are watching live on Twitch, whoa, I'm like totally derping out here. If you guys are watching live on Twitch, then please feel free to talk to me down in the chat there, and let me know what you guys think, or if you have any questions or anything, then we'll definitely go over that as well. But yeah, so we'll go ahead and jump into this game now. Typical openers for both these matchups are either Gateway or Forge Expanse from the Protoss, and the Zerg will either open Hatch first or Pool first. And based upon the pylon positioning here from Oz, it's pretty obvious he's going to open up either Forge first or Nexus first. But based on the fact that he's not scouting, I think it's almost definitely going to be Forge first. There's not much of a reason to do anything else. If you go Nexus first without scouting, then you really leave yourself vulnerable to just flat out losing a game for no reason against a really early pool, and that's pretty silly. So, hi Yaz, how's it going? Yeah, so again, if you guys are watching this on VOD, please check out my stream every Tuesday at the same time, 5 p.m. Eastern Time. I will go over some WCS replays, and I will go over some of your replays if you want me to. So that's what we'll be doing on this show from now on. It's kind of a new thing I wanted to start trying out, see how it would go, see how people liked it. The Forge is coming up here for Oz. He's just going to go ahead and scout, look at what Nestea's doing. Nestea's going Pool first here, so we're probably not going to see anything like a cannon rush because it's just too hard to get going against a Pool first. So Oz just coming up here, seeing what he can do, scouting out, and he doesn't see anything too crazy here from Nestea. Nestea just pulling his drone down now to drop the hatchery. We've gone over these type of openers a lot in these other videos, so if you guys want to get more information on the openers specifically, then check out Community SC2 on YouTube, which is my YouTube channel. You can get a lot of information there as well. And so I won't be glossing over, or I will be glossing over the openers quite a bit, not doing too much special on that. So up comes the scout once again here for Oz. He just wants to stick around and see what Nestea is doing. So for example, if this probe saw Nestea take a gas really early, especially against something like a Forge opener, that would be pretty alarming, and Oz would probably have to change his build because of that. But that's why he's going to see this probe constantly scouting and rescouting over and over to see what's going on. Here's something interesting, is Nestea is actually proxying a hatchery inside Oz's base. And this is interesting because it does a lot of things. For one, if you're Oz, you have to deal with this somehow, especially on a Forge Expand, because the gateway isn't going to be done. So there's not going to be a Zealot out for quite a while. Mothership Core is not going to be out for even longer. So if he wants to deal with this, he has to pull probes, and the amount of mining time he loses by pulling these probes is worse than what Nestea gets by losing the money for the hatchery. He could also cancel it, but the thing that it hurts Nestea in is it does hurt his tempo. So he does not have a third hatchery going up that you would normally see around this time, or even earlier. But he's just saying that he'd rather play a little more weird game, try to put Oz in a little bit of an uncomfortable position, and kind of mess him up that way. Look how many probes he actually has to pull for this. 6 probes. The only other way you can really deal with this respectably is if you can build a cannon within range here on a Forge opener, and even that is like 250 minerals for something that you can just cancel. So I like this play out in ST. It forces a lot of things. It forces Oz to play down to his tempo, and of course he can cancel it, which you can see right here. So that was a cool little move. Something you can try in your own games, but it may be a little difficult to try and play your way out of these situations. So I don't know. I guess if you really want to do that in your own games and kind of play weirder games, that's totally up to you. But either way, the biggest alarm bell that could have gone off is if Oz rescouted and didn't see any gas. He could have kind of sniffed out that hatchery not really being anything too substantial. But then he also runs the risk of letting Zerglings in and then losing probes, and that's kind of a big deal. But either way, kind of a weird play. Oz just going with the Stargate. Nothing too crazy here. This is really standard, especially after Forge Openers, to open Stargate. Usually put out a few Phoenix and see what he can get done. On the Zerg side, Nestea still has not taken a third base, so this is kind of weird. He also does have double gas here in his main, so usually any gas mining before a third hatchery against a Forge Opener is going to be a pretty big deal. It's very unusual. A lot of times it does lend itself to an all-in, but Nestea is not the type of player that will just randomly all-in. So this is also interesting. A really, really fast lair. You can see 2 base lair starting at about 645, evolution chamber as well. And the single evolution chamber will rule out builds like Ultralisks, stuff like that. So I guess we'll have to see where this goes. Phoenix is starting now for Oz, so nothing terribly unusual once again from the Protoss side. I'm still just so curious about this lair and as far as where it's going to go. And still, I'm wondering when Nestea is wanting to take his third base. Now he's starting to ghost it, so the drone should be on its way over. And that's him right there, trying to get that put up. Oz's probe is definitely going to see this as well. So Oz now knows there's nothing too wild going on here. It doesn't need to overreact and make too many extra units. Of course, he did already react to the fact that there was no third hatchery for quite a while by building this sentry here. And the Mothership Core should be out as well. At least I believe so. Yeah, she's right here. She's just hanging out. So Oz kind of is reacting to that. I should also mention that if you're Protoss, you see this super late. Whoa, Burrow is on the way. This is so weird from Nestea. So Burrow on the way, Roach Warren, maybe for some like burrowed Roach play, Tunneling Claws, stuff like that. But either way, I don't know what utility this is going to have, so we'll have to see what happens there. But so Oz basically reacting appropriately to the late third base from Nestea by producing a sentry and the Mothership Core. Sometimes you can just go straight for Stargate, but if you do that, then you run the risk of dying to an all-in. Phoenix just trying to figure out what's going on here. I don't know what the deal is with this thing just randomly clicking off the screen. That really bothers me, but either way, Overlord being pushed away now for Oz. Oz is showing a third base here, so we'll have to see if he intends to do that or if it's some kind of fake. I think this is for reals because the Robo is coming up as well. Typically the follow-up is straight into Colossus. And an Infestation Pit. This is a really fast Infestation Pit along with Burrow. Maybe... Okay, this starts to seem a little bit more like Infestors, or I guess what's more likely is maybe Swarm Hosts. There's a lot of Queens out for Nestea as well, so this is a really interesting play out of Nestea. Just getting a lot of Queens to push away to Phoenix. Phoenix are still going to be annoying for quite a while. Nestea now making 14 more drones here, and yeah, this is strange. Roach speed on the way. Really, not many roaches have been produced at all, if any at all. And yeah, that's 0 roaches with +1 and about to be roach speed. And yeah, here's the Locust upgrade. So it is going to be Swarm Hosts here, and we're going to have to see what he's able to do with that. Nestea is known for a fairly unusual style, kind of getting a little bit more along the lines of somebody like Leenock, where he plays a super low econ style. And Nestea is also really known for going into Spire, so I don't know if this is... Okay, well, just as I say that, Spire starts coming up here. Okay, so what he could do, something that we're seeing every once in a while, is you produce Swarm Hosts, you force out a lot of Colossus, and then you switch into Mutalisks. And that just kind of messes up their unit composition quite a bit. Makes it hard for them to get adjusted to what's going on. Losing Phoenix sloppily is Oz here, so that's kind of a shame. But from the Zerg perspective, the idea here is basically to get into Swarm Hosts, and the only real way to respond to Swarm Hosts in a long-term way is with Colossus. So then the idea is to start to switch into Spire, hoping that they don't have a lot of Stargates. Now this is kind of risky because, here's a little bit of a timing by the way. Just heading over here is Oz. He shouldn't do too much with this. The Queens alone could actually stop this if he just gets the right transfuses down. And now the Swarm Hosts are revealed, so Oz knows everything that's going on in regards to the Swarm Hosts. So he should be able to push those away pretty much no problem, but Oz now has to react to this. And, okay, so back what I was saying is, we all know the idea here is basically to get them to produce Colossus and get them to kind of get a composition that doesn't respond well to the Mutalisk switch that could come later. But The problem is that a lot of Protosses have started making Colossus and then just supplementing with a lot of Stargates, which does well against these Mutalisk switches. So this is kind of a risk here from Nestea, but it's also a pretty calculated one because this is pretty new in the metagame right now, to just produce a Swarm Host, make them overreact, and then switch into something else. The weird thing is that the Mutalisk as a follow-up is not usually the ones, or Mutalisk is usually not the follow-up in this type of situation. They're usually the one that forces the transitions, but in this case it's going to be the one that follows it up. At least I think so. It is just Swarm Host so far. This Spire being so early and with +1, it doesn't really make a lot of sense for this just to go lazily into Corruptors, especially since there's so many Void Rays on the way. And I don't know what Nestea knows, but Mutalisks make more sense here. So yeah, Nestea doesn't really know anything at all. So Twilight Council coming up here. Probably going to be for something like Blink to help protect his Colossus and kind of micro his way out of the Locust damage. So a lot of Swarm Hosts still coming out here. And here comes the Warp Prism Harasser from Oz. One thing you really need to do as a Swarm Host player is you need to get static defenses here in your main, which Nestea does have. A couple of spines will help out just a little bit. But even some players will go as far as putting in things like roaches and stuff to stop these big Warpins. You can see a huge Warpin should be coming here any second. And then the other huge problem is that if you overreact with your Swarm Host, all of a sudden a secondary attack from the side can do a lot of damage as well. So Oz starting to get a little bit aggressive here. Here come the Corruptors out of Nestea, so it is just going to be the Corruptor transition. Mutalisks definitely aren't out of the question yet, considering it would be a pretty good transition against what Oz has on the field. But even still, the Queen's now rallying up here. Nestea needs to protect this creep. That's a big problem right now. And the other attack eventually did get slowed down, at least enough to make him recall home. So Oz is definitely sticking back home with the rest of his army, realizing that he's not going to be able to do much. The high Queen count is so useful here. You can see these Queens did really well against those Phoenix. So Nestea pulling out a really unique style. I don't know what the deal is with my screen just freaking out like that, but eventually this does get cleaned up, so Nestea taking fairly minimal damage, losing an okay amount of workers. Looks like about 10 overall. Now we can start being annoying with the Swarm Hosts. But again, this is a problem with Swarm Hosts, is that if you have too much stuff committed back into your bases, and you can't protect your Swarm Hosts against an advancement, then you could lose a whole bunch of those. Let's just imagine for a second if those Phoenix were actually out around the map, man, I can't talk, looking for these Swarm Hosts and was able to pick off a few. That would be a big loss. What is Nestea going to spend his money on right now, though? He still has a lot of money sitting around. Oz has quite a bit too, but still, it's really curious to see Nestea sitting around with this much money and with 21 larvae. I don't know exactly what he's planning on producing right now, but I guess we'll have to see. Still, this is a very slowly developing Swarm Host build from Nestea. You can see him, he does have his 4th hatchery down. You'd like to see him devote the time to knocking down the rocks and taking his 5th earlier. But, I mean, most of the time with these really tech-heavy plays, there's kind of a section in the beginning of the, or rather the end of the mid-game and the beginning of the late game, where you can just take a lot of bases. Oz is starting to have enough, and he's starting to just say, okay, well, if you're not going to really do much and just kind of sit back, then I'm going to really punish you pretty hard for doing that. And there's a lot of available Colossus timings, especially with this many Void Rays that can deal a lot of damage. And here comes the Mutalisk transition. 18 Mutas on the way. Quite the huge transition. And if you're Nestea here, you got to be careful, because if you engage this army straight up, you do run the risk of just losing all of your Mutas, and then you're in pretty bad shape. But we'll have to see how he's able to utilize these, as the Mutalisks are starting to rally out now. Oz knocks down this hatchery, and that's why you'd like to see him take the back one, so he doesn't lose stuff like that. But either way, starting to rally up is Oz. Starting to take out a lot of the creep, which is pretty important, especially against Swarm Hosts. The Mutalisk starting to rally out to the left side. The pylon does spot it, so Oz should know what's going on now, at least if he was checking over there. Yeah, he has plenty of units to know what's going on now. So what do you do if you're Nestea now? Do you try to base trade? And it looks like the answer is yes. So he's going to start to try to pick off what he can. Free Void Ray here and there is a big deal, so grabbing those is really nice. But he needs to find a way to hold on here, because Oz's army is terrifying, and engaging this army is going to be really, really hard. Losing Overlords now is Nestea, so we're in full-on base trade mode as the Mutalisks back in the main for Nestea are dealing a lot of damage to Oz. So on both fronts, this is becoming a big problem for each player, as this is going to get quite precarious. If you're Nestea, you need to start thinking about how you're going to pick apart this army. Are you going to try and kill the Void Rays and then just let the Corruptors kill the Colossus and then worry about the Stalkers? Or are you going to try and target down the Colossus and kill the Zerglings? look at how much money Nestea has right now. About 3,000 minerals, and that could be a lot in terms of zerglings or even roaches if he was able to produce that much, but he just can't right now, specifically because he's supply blocked. But at the same time, if you hatch it on one of these hatcheries that's being attacked, then all of a sudden you just donate all that money to him. Both these players need to find a way to get a unit out on the map and build a building somewhere so they don't just get eliminated. So Nestea needs to send out a drone, which it looks like he's doing now, or at least that's just going to distance mine. But he could expand over here, he could spend like down here. And again, if he had the rocks broken down, then he would be able to deal with that just fine. It looks like Oz is going to come home and try to prevent this a little longer, as he does have these little stalker groups trying to prevent the Mutalisks from coming out. 13 more mutas on the way. So okay, this is a full-on, just straight-up Mutalisk transition. And at this point, Nestea just needs to find ways to pick apart this army, because he's barely mining right now. His mining is going to start really running dry. The Mutalisks trying to pick off what they can, just killing a couple stalkers here and there. This is exactly what you want to do if you're Nestea, is just try to pick apart the army the best you can. Go in there, try to prevent Oz from doing anything. You could see his focus in the main for a little while at least should have been pylons. I wasn't quite sure if he actually did get all the pylons. But if he just unpowers everything, then all of a sudden Oz can't reinforce, and that becomes a huge problem. So Nestea basically needs to find a way to salvage this right now, and the swarm hosts are still alive, so that's one bonus that he has. If he's ever able to take out this Colossus, then the swarm hosts are going to start doing a lot more work. Losing this extra base is Nestea. The +2 air attack upgrades is not going to finish. Here come the Mutalisks rallying from the side, so we're just finally going to have a fight. And he does just pick off the mothership core, at least he could, and no, he just decides to start targeting down whatever he can. Void Rays, Stalkers, everything dying. The reinforcements for Oz are coming, so we can see him rallying down here from the bottom left. Stalkers starting to rally in. The problem here is that there's a lot of Colossus still standing, so the swarm hosts are basically still going to not be doing anything. I have to say Oz probably did win that engagement right now. If Nestea only had Larva, he's at 3,000 minerals. He could dump out a lot of Zerglings right now and probably deal with this army just fine if he had that backup. But even still, the lack of army right now, or rather the lack of spending from Nestea, is going to be a huge problem. So still a lot of swarm hosts rallying down right now. And again, if you're in this situation, if you're running this composition, you need to pick your battles. If you just run in there and you're going to die, and that's what we saw here at an Nestea, him losing a fight right there, but he still has a chance, still trying to eliminate as many probes as possible so he can limit Oz's reproduction potential. Still, the Corruptor's starting to die off. He needs to be a little bit careful of that right now. He scoots his swarm host back, and eventually these Mutalisks are going to have to come back and help fight this, but the amount of money and the lack of army right now from Nestea is really troubling. But still, if he can somehow get enough units together to start picking this apart, if he can target down the Colossus with his Locust, then he'll be in good shape as well, because then Zergling's reinforcements will be just fine. Do these Zerglings even have speed? No, they don't. Wow, okay. That's kind of weird, but the Swarm Host starting to get killed now. The other thing that he could do is if the Corruptors were ever able to kill the Observer, that would be a big win as well, but even still, Stalker's actually starting to get a little bit thinned out here. The Colossus being targeted by the Corruptors, so there's only one Colossus left. And the Mutalisks still trying to do what they can here at the second base of Oz. So quite the crazy base trade right now. The Swarm Hosts basically all do die. There's only one more left. But look at the units now. There's only a handful of Stalkers on the map. 26 Stalkers versus 18 Mutas. And we'll have to see if Nestea is able to pull this out. A lot of Stalkers rallying up here to push these Mutalisks away, and they will definitely be able to. Nestea just can't lose any units right now. He did manage to get a hatchery down up here, and at this point with this much money, it'd almost be worth it just to throw up a whole bunch of spines around there to try and prevent the base trade from coming down. So the Spire coming up as well for Nestea, and again, this is one of these compositions where you have to pick your battles wisely. You can't just run in there and fight. So right now he's trying to pick off as many Stalkers as he possibly can. Realizing that this group of Stalkers is isolated, Nestea does fly in there and kill as many as he possibly can. And once it starts to snowball, ooh, nice recall there from Oz to get out of there. But even still, all Oz has right now is Stalkers. The Cybernetics core isn't even done right now, so he can't even continue to reinforce with Stalkers. The mining is almost non-existent for both of these players, but Nestea at this point needs to find a way to make this work. So, I always try and relate these back to your own games, and if you're in your own games, if you want to run these Swarm Host into Muta plays, I would say it's a little more risky than it's worth. I don't know that I advise this all too much, but either way, you can try stuff like this out, and the biggest deal is that you definitely need to find good engagements. You need to find ways to pick apart his army. So here comes Oz once again trying to target down the Spore Crawler so his Observer doesn't die. He does just go ahead and target down the Swarm House now that he has detection here. Nestea has to find some way to make this work here, and he is starting these spines like we were talking about. So Spine Crawler's coming up here, another spawning pool is coming up as his original one is going to die in his main base. Quite the crazy game here. So, at least as far as on Oz's side, he's in kind of a bad way because he can't continue to reinforce. And the more spines that go up, the harder and harder time he's going to have breaking this once he gets all of his Stalker Stalker armies reunited. Now, this is the last Nexus for Oz. He never decided to save up enough money to make something else. There's actually just an awkward group of workers sitting over here. But Nestea does finally get the Nexus, so Oz is revealed. Nestea should be able to see everything that Oz has in just a minute. So you can see Oz pulling workers down here. And this is basically going to win Nestea the game. More than likely right here is all these spines being up. Nestea needs to fly his mutas back and realize what's going on, and yeah, he realizes that now. But the fact that the Stalkers have to go through the spines, the mutas from the back and target them down in a matter of seconds, considering they'll already be hurt from the Spine Crawlers, Nestea finally does congregate enough, and Oz GG's out. So that was a pretty crazy game right there. But the main points that I kind of want to make is that with the Swarm Hosts, if you do have territory out on the map, number one, you need static defenses back at home. That's a big deal. If you don't have static defenses back home, you leave your Swarm Hosts vulnerable, you can lose a lot of economy, a lot of tech, etc. Secondly, you need to figure out how to support your Swarm Hosts. Some people like to just sit around and turtle. Some people like to completely switch up the composition to make the Protoss have to react. So Nestea decides to just go Mutalisks and force him to react by putting him into a composition that he'll have to completely change into, which is a lot of Phoenix. So understanding the matchup and understanding how you're supposed to make the Protoss opponent kind of roll into your hands is a big deal in this matchup. So what I would say, if you want to play this more tech-heavy style like Nestea, you need to pick a very committed tech, whether that's Spire or whether that's something like Infestors into Ultralisks or something like that, or in this case Swarm Hosts. You need to figure out, okay, how's the Protoss going to respond to what I make? If the Protoss player decides to respond with the Swarm Host with Colossus, which he basically has to, then at that point you have two options. Either you go Spire with a lot of mutas and you make them try and switch up their composition into something like a lot of Phoenix, which is basically the only way they're going to deal with it. Or, knowing that they have a ton of Colossus, you just say, I'm going to switch into Ultras and try to reduce your unit count as far as Colossus when you decide to get more aggressive. There's a lot of different ways you can do that, but this is one way that you can do that. So I thought this replay was pretty useful just to show off a couple of things that we could be doing. Whoops, I pressed the wrong button. But yeah, so I'm going to take a short little break, probably about a 30-second break, and jump into the next game here. So just give me a little bit while we get the games transitioned.